Hark, it's an 87th Precinct podcast side pod. It's Christmas, and I am joined once again by our most common returning guest. My brother Garry is back to square the circle on Evan Hunter's early juvenile science fiction stories that were published by Winston Science Fiction in the very early part of his career. So we've looked at Rocket to Luna, which, quick summary, Garry?
They go to the moon and they find a plant.
And Danger Dinosaurs.
They go to the past and they get to time travel all wrong. With dinosaurs.
Yeah. And now we are searching for the Feathered Serpent with some teenage boy in Find The Feathered Serpent, which was his first contribution to the Winston Science Fiction range. So, before we get going, let's put this into Evan Hunter context, and then we'll put it into a little bit of world context. World context, that sounds more dramatic than it needs to be. Basically speaking, in terms of Evan Hunter, Ed McBain's career, the story we're talking about is literally either the third or fourth thing he ever had published in his professional writing career.
This one is?
Yeah.
Okay.
So in November 1951, the story Reaching for the Moon by S.A. Lombino comes out. In December 1951, Fury on First comes out, which is a sports story. And then in 1952, there are two novels. One is The Evil Sleep! By Evan Hunter, which has later been republished by Hard Case Crime as So Nude, So Dead. And also Find the Feathered Serpent.
Right.
Which he was persuaded to do because essentially it was a big paycheck. The publishing house he worked for and had his agent at, which was Scott Meredith, they basically came to one of the editors there and said, can you get us a load of people to start this science fiction range for kids? It's got to be a bit educational. And presumably Evan Hunter did what I suspect what several people in the office did, which was a bit like, ugh, really, do we have to? I don't know if I can write a novel. I've been doing all these short stories. And then someone waved some money around and they went, okay, yeah, let's have a go at that then. And he ended up doing 3. But this isn't just the start of his kids' writing career. This is his start, or it's the start of his writing career, essentially.
Right.
So keep that in mind.
Okay.
That's what we're talking about.
So just to get a clear mind, then this is, timeline-wise,
this is the first of the kids' novels in the
of which
Winston...
Danger Dinosaurs was one.
And Rocket to Luna was another.
So this came first.
This came first.
Okay, I see. So we've gone backwards in time.
We have gone backwards.
Both literally and figuratively.
And not at all.
Not at all, no.
Yeah. But let's have a little look at what was going on around the time that this was published, because I think this was published on April the 14th, 1952. I think that's the exact date. I found a review that was dated that and had that as the release date for the book. So I've used that as a little trigger point to have a little look at what was going on in the world around then. Or certainly in terms of what we do in the main podcast, which is the charts in the UK and the US. But it's quite difficult in 1952 because more or less modern charts don't exist.
Right. I'm glad about that, because if you'd asked me to guess, that wouldn't...
Well, I can still ask you to guess what you think the biggest sort of song in the UK was in 1952. Based on probably sheet music sales.
Oh, right. White Christmas.
No, it wasn't. Not in April.
April Christmas.
April Christmas.
I don't know.
Well, there was no recorded...
Case... No.
What was that mine?
I was going back playing the piano like Doris Day, singing Que Sera.
Oh, like out of the Hitchcock film?
But...
No. Let me put you out of your misery.
Okay.
Basically, there's no recorded music chart in the UK until November of 1952, when the official charts start. So it would have been measured on sheet music sales, and there's no particular official record. But it's probably Unforgettable by Nat King Cole.
Okay.
Unforgettable.
Yeah. Okay.
That's how the joke goes. But the best-selling music in the US around this time was a song called Wheel of Fortune by K-Star, which I don't know very well. But I thought, because it's Christmas, and one of the big things at Christmas we like to do is rifle through the TV schedules and look at what was on. Well, let's look at what was not on at Christmas, but on the April the 14th, the week of April the 14th. In fact, no, the day. Let's do the day. The week would be here forever.
Okay.
1952, in the BBC. I'm just going to go through these, and this is the sort of thing that we would have been watching in the UK at the time. it was mainly radio programmes, and then the TV was only on briefly through the day and varied in regions. So it started at 2:05 in the afternoon on the 14th of April 1952, with racing at Kempton Park. Horse racing, that is.
Okay.
And at 14:30 we have racing at Kempton Park. Followed at 3 o'clock by racing at Kempton Park.
Okay.
3:30, racing at Kempton Park. But at 20 to 4 we have a film called Men of Champagne. At 5 o'clock we have some children's television. Hooray!
Okay. What does it say? What?
Yeah, it's called A Farmer's Boy, which is a film of open-air life about an English boy who wants to be a farmer like his father. That sounds very...
It sounds very charming.
Yeah. But then at 5:15 we have children's television again. Johnny Jones, His Home and Town, which is the film about an American boy at home, at school and at play in a typical American small town.
Okay.
I'm sure that was very educational for everyone in the UK.
And I wonder if it was an actual American import or
just some
awful American accents.
Oh, I don't know.
I mean, British accents were pretty awful on television because of them people feeling they had to
do received pronunciation.
So, yeah.
But then after that, it gets even more exciting because the next children's TV programme is just called Fire Engines! And it is literally someone going to a fire headquarters on the Thames, so Thames Embankment, not in the Thames. Newsreel, a world survey, All the Fun of the Fair is a programme, Music for You, starring Benjamino Gigli, and then a programme called Know Your Partner, a challenge to those who think they know all about their partners, be they husband and wife, mother and son, or business associates. Sounds like a lot of fun, doesn't it?
It does, and it sounds like a format that has stood the test of time.
Yes. It's
Mr. and Mrs.
Mr. and Mrs. basically, isn't it? Then you have the weather and news done. Basically, after the news, TV's shut.
Right.
But on the radio, if you finish listening to live chess on the radio, which was on there, and then you listen to Richard Attenborough presenting some records from his collection.
Why not?
Yeah, doesn't say what they are. Yes, there was a show on the Light programme starring Charlie Chester and Tony Hancock doing Calling All Forces, which was one of these radio shows that went out to our boys abroad.
Yeah.
Written by Bob Monkhouse and Dennis Goodwin.
Wow.
So that would have been a lot of laughs.
That sounds like it. Good cast, good writers.
But I'll go through a quick rundown of the top 10 US TV shows of US TV shows of 1952, according to RetroWaste.com. Number 1, I Love Lucy.
Mm-hmm. Never seen it.
No, well,
it's not part of our heritage, is it? So
it has been shown over here, but no, it's not in any way part of
But we all know that it exists.
It's not like the way Cheers was sown through our lives for years through the 80s and 90s.
Yeah. I can say the Waltons, but I do actually remember seeing some of the Waltons.
Well, number 2 was Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts. Number 3 was Arthur Godfrey and His Friends.
Who is this Arthur Godfrey?
I've never heard of Arthur Godfrey. Number 4 was Dragnet. So it's a police crime thing there. Big influence on
Precursor to
McBain.
Yeah.
Number 5 was the Texaco Star Theatre. Number 6 was the Buick Circus Hour, in which presumably cars did a lot of stunts.
Is that I was just about to say that about Texaco thing as well. That's the actual.
Well, they're just the sponsors.
Yeah,
the sponsors for these things. Number 7 was the Colgate Comedy Hour.
Right.
Number 8 was Gangbusters. Number 9 was You Bet Your Life, which was the Groucho Marx helmed game show thing.
Okay.
Very good, the bits of it I've seen. And number 10 was Fireside Theatre. I don't know why I said it like that. I just felt like it was the right way to say it.
Imagine it would be a highbrow.
Well, yeah. A man in a smoking jacket presenting adaptations of Dickens or something like that.
Great.
So anyway, that's 1952 sorted out, or April anyway.
Yeah.
So should we get stuck into Find the Feathered Serpent?
Okay.
I could find one review from the period. This is from the Kirkus Review magazine. And I won't say all of it because it's a bit of a giveaway of what we're going to talk about.
Okay.
But it does open with a ridiculous piece about a time ship. More sentiment than science. This is a lush spot on those boyhood dreams of glory. I'm not quite sure what that means.
A lush?
Because lush to me sounds quite good.
Yeah. But it's not couched in complimentary terms either side. It doesn't sound like he's paying it a compliment.
No.
It's gone from ridiculous to lush.
Like it was ridiculous. This story features so many ducks.
Right.
Find the Feathered Serpent. Turns out it's just a duck with a load of feathers glued on. A duck with feathers glued on? I think you can tell we may have had some Cava tonight. A duck.
A duck.
A load of ducks in a row with some extra feathers glued on, so they look like a hairy snake.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, whoo. The front cover for this is quite a nifty little.
I quite like it.
Painting of 3 of the main characters and a snake, appropriately. I mean, we don't want to give away who the characters are yet,
but it's most definitely not a stock cover, is it? It has been commissioned especially.
Yeah, it's painted properly for this.
And once we've talked about the characters, we can always tell you what it actually depicts.
And the blurb about the author on this one, because as this is credited to Evan Hunter, so it does say about the author, Evan Hunter's varied background probably helped him devise the varied cast of characters. Ancient Mayan civilizations, bold Vikings, and 20th century explorers who people find the feathered serpent. For this author, at one time or another, has been an English teacher, telephone dispatcher, lobster salesman, and now occupies an editor's chair. So they're suggesting those jobs have helped him with this story about time travel to Mayan civilizations.
Right.
A graduate of Hunter College, he also served with the military during World War II in Cuba, Hawaii and Japan, although it was actually after the war ended by the time he got to the Japanese theatre. Though Evan Hunter found studying of the ancient Maya hieroglyphics the most fascinating bit of research necessary to write Find the Feathered Serpent, he prefers the more usual forms of relaxation of piano playing and sketching.
This is all hokum, is it not?
Well, it's not, because his pathway was art for a long time before he decided to write. And he does play the piano, but by his own admission, he wasn't very good at it.
Biographising again, if that's such a thing. Like he did, because he did in one of the other books, he was all sorts of stuff, wasn't he?
Oh, he's made up a lot about himself in various bits and pieces here and there. That is the start of him basically narrowing his life down to a load of little sound bites that can go on the sleeve of a book. Yeah. Because most of that stays in place. Like the job list is not exhaustive, I know this through my research, but it's his most significant jobs, and they're mentioned through the rest of his career.
I don't think that he spent any time contemplating Mayan hieroglyphs.
Well,
other than when he was writing this book, specifically when he was writing this book, probably for half an hour in a library before he wrote this book. But you'll see.
Well, yeah.
I mean, and there is quite a complex numeric system described later on in the book, which would have taken some very deep research, I'm sure.
I think my opening gambit with this is to state that I reckon this is essentially a book where the research he did for it is the equivalent of going on one Wikipedia page these days.
Yeah. It's getting out the children's encyclopedia of Mayan civilization and then taking some notes from it and stringing them together into a story. So, essentially, I think it should be clear by now, but do you want to give a very broad overview of what actually happens here, Gary? Oh, very broadly, there's a time ship that has been developed by a university, with university funding by a doctor, and a team want to go back and they want to discover the origin. Well, of all the things they could do with time travel technology, a university have just, as they do, funded one of these little projects being time travel, and it looks like it's worked. And their first trip in it, from what I can understand, although it's not made absolutely clear it's their first trip, their first expedition in it is to go back in time, specifically to go and find the origins of kind of a god story from Mayan civilization. I need to look at the words to remember what it's called. It's
well, essentially, this is based in historical fact as best we know it. To this day, this stands in that there was a ruler called Quetzalcoatl. It was called the Great White God, but there was actually a ruler with that name. Yeah. It was also known in certain religions as Kukulkan. Yeah. That's my pronunciation.
Kukulkan, yeah.
But there's also references to an earlier figure called that, who's more of a deity-type character.
Yes.
So they want to, this university, their ambition, they built a time ship, they could do anything with it, is they want to just check.
Just check if
there's any reason why that name existed twice.
Kind of like popped up from, and where the legend began, and I guess it's a bit like wanting to go back and see Robin Hood.
Yeah,
deciding where he became who it was based on, if anyone real, and where that became turned into actual,
Yeah.
It's a strange
when reality became myth, or when myth became reality, and all that sort of stuff.
But quite a specific window of time. I think probably because this captures a lot of imagination with the kind of... I don't know if there was other stuff going on at the time, other literature that explored this kind of era that captured young boys' imagination of time travel or Aztecs and Mayans and that kind of thing.
Well, that's always been a fascinating bit of history.
Yeah.
It's probably more important in America as a landmass generally than it is to us across the other side of the world, despite it being the Europeans who went over there and essentially cocked everything up for everyone. But I suppose we did that in America as well.
Yeah.
I will just report to our listeners that if you're hearing a strange rattling sound in the background, it's probably ghosts in your house. It's definitely not radiators in our room here.
Yeah. So that's the idea basically behind what they're going to do. And as a common theme with the other two books, a team are going, a well-picked team of people. However, the inventor has an unfortunate accident, and instead of him going with his highly trained team, he's going to send his 15-year-old son or 16-year-old son or something.
Yeah. So there's no backup for this guy if he's out of action. He's basically his route is I'll send my teenage son, not someone else in the department.
No.
Not should we make sure we've got someone on standby? You're on standby for being the first time astronaut thing.
Yeah.
Whatever you want to call it. No, I'll send my 16-year-old son,
my untrained son who didn't invent time travel, which would have been a handy thing to have. So, and that's as much as from a broad overview. That's as much.
They
as
go
you
back
need
in
to
time. An adventure happens.
Yeah.
Some stuff befalls them.
The end.
The end.
Happy Christmas.
Now, I will say as well, quite right at the front, I do like the concept as a boy's own adventure type thing. It's a good old romp, and I just think the mechanism by which he uses the mechanisms he uses to tell the story, to get the characters into the situations, and to permit the story to progress are pretty leaden. They're a bit sort of like, really, that's a bit like for a kick-off. The main scientist is injured, so he sends his son.
Yeah, they're all very unbelievable. They're all very fortunate. They're very serendipitous.
And none of the other three people on the ship go, what?
Yeah, well, hang on. Yeah, we're going through time. Yeah, it's strange, but it is all about moving the story along or getting to that next, or getting the plot going. It is, and you can tell it's. That's why I think it's half an hour's research down the library and let's hit a certain word count. I'm not saying but it is a good romp. It would actually. I can imagine it as a film, kind of a Jason and the Argonauts type style. Epic film without the actual, but without actually that any kind of monsters and whatnot. But that kind of era of filmmaking and the high seas and jungle and that kind of that palette. It would make a great.
There'd be some wonderful painted backdrops, wouldn't there, for the scenery, especially when they get to the ancient city and civilization.
But you'd be watching the film thinking, well, that's a bit of a stretch. Even when you're watching a time travel film and still thinking, well, that's a bit daft, isn't it, that they did that? I mean, didn't he? For a start, his father injures himself simply by going to stand on a stool that someone's moved out the way, or a foot ladder or something, isn't he? And
it's rather prosaic.
Yeah.
Shall we go through it chapter by chapter here? And the first chapter is our hero, Neil, going to just have a look at the time machine that's being built, which I think really it's quite well described. I still can't quite get it in my mind.
Oh, the hourglass thing, yeah. It's like I think of it as a hot air balloon with a reflection, and so it's literally like an hourglass,
like a hot air balloon that's been squashed in the middle.
Well, no, like a hot air balloon that's got an air balloon underneath it and on top of the basket. Because it says it's like an hourglass. Yeah. It looks like an hourglass.
The machine was at least 25 feet high, a beautifully tooled work of aluminium and plastic. The control room was in the exact centre of the ship, an aluminum, not aluminium, aluminum band that seemed to squeeze the plastic bubbles above and below into a constricting wasp waist. Exactly like an hourglass.
I think I know why you might be having trouble visualising it. Did you look at the glossary?
No.
There's a glossary of terms at the end of my one. I'm sure there is on yours.
Yeah, there is.
And in case you were unsure, it's got the entry for plastic bubbles.
Oh, right.
It says plastic bubbles are transparent globes, much like the gun turrets on Air Force bombers. In the time machine, of course, the bubbles are respectively large enough to hold a passenger and a rotor shaft.
Oh, thank heavens for that.
So that might have helped plug some gaps for you there.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a strange... You can't imagine how it would sit up, or it kind of... It's on props or something, I don't know.
It's got rotors like a helicopter on top of it as well.
Yeah.
Which seems very clunky. For a machine that can travel in time but also needs to travel in space, that he felt the need to give it a quasi-realistic method of lifting up and moving side to side.
It has to be off the ground, though, because if it's not off the ground...
It'll take the ground with it.
It'll take the ground... Yeah, it takes a kind of a bubble of time with it, and it therefore has to be up and elevated, which is always the thing about time travel, is if you don't...
Yeah,
it crosses your mind when you think about time travel. If you travel from the same point in space to the same point in space but a different point in time, it's likely that you're going to be above or below ground that wasn't there before. So so that's good that he's thought of that. But it is it doesn't say how it's kind of propped up. The time travel angle, and here Neil's own heart skipped a beat at the thought. Had its heart in the control room, in the temporium crystal that lay covered by sheets of aluminium in the control panel. It's
like everything's quite normal and modern materials for construction like plastic and aluminum, and then it's just, well, how do we get time? Temporium crystal.
Absolutely fine. It's why not? It's the same as
it'll do. I'm not fussed about it.
It's every time. What is it in Star Trek?
Dilithium?
No, dilithium's what they use for the warp, but whenever there's a temporal anomaly, there's a certain type of energy that's always referenced, and if you ever hear them talking about the energy, it means it's going to be a time traveller.
Like tachyon.
Tachyon is used, yeah. So, yeah.
God, we're nerds.
So, yeah, temporium. Why not? He does talk a bit more about the crystal later on, doesn't he?
He does,
about its properties.
Yeah. But basically, what's happened to our Neil Folzen, as he's gone and seen his dad, who has been laid up with a broken leg. His dad says, "You're going in time tomorrow."
He's like, "I'm playing baseball, Dad." Well, not anymore. Yeah, it's yeah.
And they go into Yucatan to find out if the feathered serpent was a man as well as a god. What was the legend all about? So we get into chapter 2, Ocean Crack-Up it's called, because this machine has to travel in time and space. Mm-hmm. So they're not above where they want to end up, so it has to travel around the globe whilst travelling through time. Yeah,
so they travel... I don't know if the idea that the vector of kind of where they're travelling to in space is important too, because it talks about the at full speed the machine was capable of travelling some 300 years an hour, which means 5 years a minute, a month every single second. The machine was calibrated so that it would land in the right place at the right time, and it has to travel in space.
Well, I quite like that, though, because that's rather than it just blinking out of existence and blinking into the story, a bit like Doctor Who does when the TARDIS is working, as it seems to be most of the time now. It does involve a certain amount of skill and jeopardy in the actual travel, which comes to fruition straight away, because in Chapter 2, something's gone wrong and the machine's stuck on full speed in terms of travel, and they have to try and manually force it down.
Yeah, it's a huge kind of chapter of explaining... Basically, it all comes down to them forcing a lever, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And they manages to pretty much scrape a chapter out of it. But that's it, really. And then they kind of get it under control. And then they kind of wait to see if it's bad. If it's okay, but they're not sure. And then it isn't. And it all happens again. And we should say about the crew, there's a crew of 4, isn't there?
So we've got Neil, who's our hero, the lad. We've got Dave, who's the main pilot.
Dave Saunders.
Yeah. And then in the other bubble, below them, along for the ride, is Arthur Blake and Dr. Manning.
Yes, who are a historian and an archaeologist, are they not?
Essentially, yeah. And who, by the end of this chapter, are dead.
Completely deaded. I mean, in some ways, I was thinking, oh, here we go, because it was a bit like the Moon one. We had to have all these kind of prop characters who were there to kind of give educational kind of sound bites on things as they were happening, but they didn't last very long at all.
No.
They were in a different. They were in the bottom section of the ship, whilst Dave and Neil were in the control room.
Yeah.
And they were just every now and again going, "Everything all right up there?" And Neil just keeps on saying, "Yeah, it's fine, but we can't. We can't come down. It'll be a few hours yet."
Yeah, they don't even tell them that something's gone wrong, do they?
No, they don't. They just leave them there.
And then they did. I have a feeling that at some point someone said to Evan Hunter, "Too many characters. You don't need these." Because he was probably planning to do what he does in those later books, which is have someone along to be the well, such and such is this and that and the other.
Yeah.
But instead, that ends up spread around Dave and Neil.
Yeah. Yeah, not even that much Neil, but no, not Neil and Dave.
But poor Arthur and Dr. Manning, they're dead in chapter 3.
Yeah, and not in quite a horrible way, actually. I mean, it says so they crash, don't they? They crash into the ocean, which is why it's called an ocean, whatever it's called, that last chapter. So they appear, they've arrived somewhere in time, but they crash into an ocean.
Yeah.
And they go to explore. Once they pick themselves up, they go to explore the pod where the scientists were, and find the limp form of Dr. Manning hanging from his safety belt on the plastic wall opposite him. Below Dr. Manning, a pool of bright red blood was forming on the floor. Yeah, and then I
like this one. Some of these pieces, and this is the plastic wall, lay on the floor beneath the dangling athletic form of Dr. Manning.
Yeah.
Athletic is not the word to use there, is it?
Yeah, it's not athletic anymore.
You don't look at that situation and go, well, it's really well toned.
Yeah. And that's
his guts are dripping out all over your bubble.
Just before a thing where it says, another piece of jagged plastic was embedded deeply in Dr. Manning's neck. Yeah. Oh, Dr. Manning's athletic neck. So, yeah, it's... crumpled against what had been the aluminium floor of the lower bubble, curved grotesquely, his neck slanting at a weird angle from his body, was old Arthur Blake. They've both had it. They've been completely... They've not just died and they've gone into the water and they thought, oh dear. He's done quite a bit of description of these two being mangled in this crash.
And then Dave, the senior member on the trip, says, let's give them a decent burial, Neil. They were swell guys. They buried them at sea, which sounds to me like they just pushed them out of the hole.
Yeah.
That was the last post.
And the sea quickly reached out with a green, rolling tongue and hungrily snatched up its offering. I quite like that, but it does sound a bit more grim than it needed to be. Yeah.
No sooner have they pushed them into the sea than they spot something on the horizon, because they're now surrounded by water, and it turns out to be a sail and a ship. And that confuses them, because in the time period they know that they've reached, somewhere between AD 100 and 600, there should be no sails on the water, because the Mayans, or the Mayas, have no sail technology.
But it shouldn't really confuse them, because he's already said at this point they're pretty sure what range of time they're in. But the part of the problem they crashed was that all the controls were locked out and going mad, and so they're not entirely sure where they are geographically at all. He says quite clearly, we could be anywhere, because it was going off in a direction and different speed than I thought. And so then he's thinking, so we shouldn't be seeing any sails, but he has just said we could be anywhere, so they could be anywhere.
Yeah.
But luckily they are exactly where they thought they should be.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a... He kind of... I think he almost forgets he's written that in. He says, which means we can be somewhere off the coast of Yucatan, or somewhere off the coast of Pensacola, or somewhere off the coast of Lower California in the Pacific. We might be even in the middle of the Great Salt Lake. But, well, no, they're exactly where, luckily, they were heading. They think they must be, because obviously then he talks about the sail.
Yeah.
So
they do what you would do if you see a sail on the horizon and you're about to sink and your time ship is just bobbing along. You get your guns out.
Break out the rifles.
And we get to chapter 4 and we meet some Vikings. Vikings.
But what they're doing...
And there's quite a long piece about... Sorry, Gary. There's quite a long piece about how to load and use a rifle as well.
Yeah, which is interesting, because as you won't see later, because we won't be discussing it, the rifles play very little after this in the story at all.
Yeah. Well, basically, they meet these Vikings and they want to get them on side, so they don't want to frighten them. So they don't shoot anyone, and the Vikings go, can we have your weapons? And they go, yeah, all right.
Yeah.
And that's it.
And then the rifles never come back.
No.
Even later on, when there's quite a lot of fighting going on. And
a rifle would actually turn the tide of the entire thing. One shot from one rifle.
And because he spends a chapter telling about how to reload one and how to use it and how to fire with it, then they never do. That's a good chunk of chapter 4 is how to use it. But then there's the best bit, which is so luckily
Neil has both remembered what a Viking ship looks like from his history classes.
Yeah, which I think we can all, we
That's
can all have
fair
a
enough.
stab at, really, couldn't we?
And eventually they get taken on board this ship because the time vessel's just dead in the water.
Yeah, it's kind of
literally dead
floating,
in the water. Yeah. And the Vikings obviously start speaking to them. This may be my least favourite part.
You know, when they remember that chapter before when he seeded the whole thing about having a Swedish family? Oh no, because he didn't tell us that until this point, did he?
No.
Because he says, well, Neil hesitated, unsure himself. It sounded like Swedish.
Do you understand Swedish?
Why, sure. My father was born in Sweden. We spoke every time my grandfather came to visit.
Now, to me, that implies that what he would know is he would know some basic conversational Swedish, like the hello, how are you?
Yeah. You wouldn't.
Goodbye, thank you. It's not fluent Swedish.
And not fluent Swedish from, where are we? 58?
Well, AD 100 to AD 600, something like that.
So, I mean...
Because Swedish is not a language that hasn't changed.
No. I would say, I mean, I'm no linguist, but I would say over 2,000 years, it's going to have changed quite hugely, because some of the cultures that would have contributed to all of those languages will
If anyone is a language expert and wants to tell us that Swedish, a modern Swedish person could be understood by a Viking, then please do let us know. But I think it seems very unlikely. However, if that wasn't the case, then the book would basically just end here and they'd be killed and thrown overboard.
Yeah. This is the old universal translator problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
How do you do anything that involves going to another planet or another part of the world, even, where...
Star Trek has the universal translator.
Yeah.
Doctor Who has a power gifted by the TARDIS.
Yeah. Hitchhikers as the Babelfish.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And this one has a Swedish grandfather. But not just a Swedish grandfather.
I brought him with me. Who's that little old man?
Basically, they can understand each other. That's all fine. They can talk to the Vikings. That's what we need to know.
Yeah, and so they make friends with the Vikings, except for one little sneaky Viking called Olaf. Who thinks that they are devils.
Yeah. They don't like him from the off, do they? They can tell he's a bit of a... He's the number 2, and he's kind of whispering in... So Eric's the main Viking, isn't he?
Eric the Viking.
Eric the Viking, yeah.
And he's quite sort of wise as well as clearly strong and powerful as a leader. But the best thing about this is... almost everything someone says, Olaf pops up and goes, that's what the devil would do.
Yeah.
So, your clothes are strange, Eric remarked. The clothes of the devil, Olaf said. Everything is, the devil.
Evil,
the
and
devil.
They speak the tongue of the devil. Yeah.
There's one way to sort that out. It is to end up with having to have a fight with this angry Viking.
Well, they appease them for a few days by saying, well, we'll
tell you where land is.
Because they're lost. The reason we think the Vikings are over here is that they tell them they've drifted off course.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're completely out of their waters. They're on the other side of the ocean. Yeah. And so they convince them that they can help find them land if they tow the time ship and take them on board, basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, after a few days of not finding land, Olaf starts challenging them, and they have a big old fight.
But what starts it off, and one of my favourite lines of any book I've ever read, is that Dave, in the situation he's in, is like, I need a cigarette.
Oh yeah.
He gets a cigarette out, he starts, and Neil's like, don't do that, that's a bit weird, that doesn't exist yet. Because they're all looking at him, because he's got fire coming out of his mouth, essentially. Olaf asks him what it was, and Neil says, my friend was smoking. Olaf's face remained blank. Tell your friend to throw this evil cylinder overboard. That's my favourite line in this
Evil
book,
cylinder.
and almost in all literature.
Especially when you think that that's ancient Swedish for the words. I mean, how often when his granddad came back did they talk about cylinders? Unless his granddad was some kind of a...
Oh, Neil, how nice to see you. What shape is this? And in 3D this shape would be?
Yeah. The demon breathed fire, I saw it.
Well, see, there's quite a little clever seeding there, because I thought at this point the notion was these people have witnessed Dave apparently breathing fire. Maybe he's got something mystical about him that will come into history.
Yeah. Yeah, no.
But anyway, we better race on a little bit. But basically, they have a fight. He punches Olaf in the face quite a lot. Dave does. And then they hit land.
Yeah, they're saved by the land, aren't they? It looks like it's going to go bad for them, but land happens and that distracts the fight from getting any worse, and so they're okay.
And once they've arrived, essentially the issue is they need to find food, water, all that sort of stuff. Dave just basically decides he's going to hang around with the time ship, and he leaves Neil to go off with the Vikings.
Yeah, that's more or less the last. We don't see much of Dave for quite a long time after that. He's the only thing he does is he gets really annoyed that he can't smoke the last of his cigarettes in case people think he's a demon, which is a great way to give up.
Yeah.
So he gives his lighter to...
He gives his lighter to Neil and basically says, look, keep this because otherwise I'll just smoke all these cigarettes and then I won't have any cigarettes.
I won't have any cigarettes and it'll stop me looking like a demon in front of all the Vikings. And you go into the jungle with all the Vikings and look for food and water, or...
But chapter 7 starts with them going off searching for water in the jungle. And chapter 7 starts with 3 or 4 paragraphs where the perspective on the story changes. So it opens, heat, intolerable, blazing down through the treetops, scorching the forest. Sorry, there's a hyphen. Scorching the forest. Sound, a medley of sounds that rose in cacophony to greet the eardrums. And over all this, a wearisome fatigue that pulled at the leg muscles and worked its way across your back and your shoulders. Sweat oozed from every pore in your body and your shirt clung to your back, hugging your skin, and so on. But it reads like one of those chapters in an 87th Precinct book.
It's definitely
where the city has come alive, and it's you in the city, or in the weather, in the rain or the heat. So that's a real precursor to the style. It's
very interesting because he swaps both the perspective in time and the perspective in person.
Yeah.
To talking about, talking in the third person about it in the past tense, which it's completely incongruous with everything else. It's such a great style, such a flash of what he is going to become.
Yeah.
That once those couple of paragraphs out of the way, he does it in another one of the chapters. He does it a couple of times, and I think he did it in some of the other books. We had a couple of paragraphs where you're like, "Oh, that's McBain."
Yeah.
That's like a McBain, but he hasn't got his muse yet.
Yeah,
he's got the.
He's developing his style, but he hasn't. Yeah. He hasn't hit the best format to use it in.
Yeah, it's just because that works much better. Talking about a gritty kind of New York style city, about crime and the kind of the stench and the kind of the filth of modern living and the beauty of the city, rather than going through a jungle looking for water with your Viking friends
that you've suddenly made because you can speak Swedish. Well, unfortunately, his language skill fails him when he gets caught by the Mayans.
Yes, which is what happens.
He tries to speak to them in Spanish. No good.
No, because he's got high school Spanish, hasn't he?
Yeah.
He says, but...
They try to get away, but basically the Vikings are captured, or this group is captured, the couple of Vikings and Neil. They meet... I am racing through a little bit here, but they meet the priest of this civilization, and he talks to them about, basically... They find some way of making contact through communication, through the usual thing you see in these sorts of stories, gestures and pointing and saying, "Me, Neil. Neil?"
Yeah, they do a lot of that kind of first contact type of drawing pictures in the sand with a stick and pointing.
But essentially they make friends, which is lucky because Neil's clearly very good at this diplomacy through time. And they make friends, and the Mayans give them a big feast, at which the only thing Neil missed was bread. Could that be significant? Well, it could be.
Yeah.
And they have a lovely feast, and there's some dancing and singing, and then another tribe attacks.
Has they killed the snake by this point?
I don't know, have they killed the snake by this point? It's probably quite significant, isn't it?
Because isn't that why they start to trust them?
Oh yeah, sorry. We missed a really big bit out there, haven't I?
Yeah, no, I'm just...
They try to buy the trust of the Mayans, and a huge snake comes out of the forest, and Eric, the Viking, slays it.
Lops its head off with an axe.
Yeah.
He slays the serpent.
He does, yeah. He chops the front duck off the row of ducks that have been...
It's glued together with feathers.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why they trust them, but and then they take them back to have a big feast in their honour. It's like a priest, isn't it, the main guy who...
Yeah.
And
but there's a description of when the other tribe attack, the Mayans, which is what I was talking about before, and he says, "Suddenly the battle burst like a balloon filled with blood." Which is both brilliant and awful at the same time, I think, as a phrase. And then there's a chapter, in one of the chapters, there's a description of how the Mayans counted using fingers and lines in the sand.
So, where have we got to? They've been attacked. Have we been attacked and we've sorted that out?
Yeah.
They have the first attack, but they realise that these Mayans are really quite outnumbered by some of their foes, but are able to defend themselves, but one day they'll be overrun.
Yeah.
But with the help of the Vikings there as well, they're able to push them back a bit. They realise that if they're going to get back, they're going to need to be able to fill their ship with provisions enough to see them across a long voyage.
Yeah.
And that's not going to happen this side of the harvest. So they're probably in for a long haul.
So they have to make friends, they have to learn how to talk to each other, which they do surprisingly quickly.
Very quickly.
Quickly in story terms, but actually the length of time this takes, there must be at least a couple of seasons worth of story here.
Yeah. Yeah,
because they're worried about the crops failing and not having enough food to share.
They've got a lot of food in their stores, but not if you consider the fact that they've got to last them all winter, haven't they? So we settled into a bit of we're going to basically, the story's taking a bit of a breath here. You're going to spend a bit of time with the Mayans, learn a bit about their culture.
Yeah, and so Neil makes friends with a brother and sister called Rixal and Tila.
Yeah, who befriend him and explain how to count.
Yeah, by showing him plums.
Yeah, and then basically he goes into a bit of detail about how basically they use a tally system. You either 5 dots, you have 4 dots or a line meaning 5, and if you stack them up, so 3 straight lines and 4 dots is 19, and so they establish how to count. They go to show him some things, don't they? Like they show him around the city. This is where it gets a little bit like working through the encyclopedia. Yeah. Children's encyclopedia. There's a lot of let's go and look at a traditional Mayan football game, like a rubber ball game that they play.
It's like a precursor of basketball.
Yeah, and let's go and look at like how they prepare some food, and let's go and look at how they do their crops and whatnot. And all the time he's getting better and better at talking to them, and then to a point where he pretty much can just converse in Mayan.
So these Vikings, these Mayans, these modern Americans can just chat amongst themselves. But we didn't realise that sneaky old Olaf has gone off to form a little side troop to try and take over and steal a load of food with one of the captains of the Mayan guards, who's called Baz.
Yes.
Which is a really good name.
Yeah, so all the way through
Full name Barry.
All the way through this, Olaf has been reluctantly going along, but thinking, why are we waiting? Why don't we just take their food? Why are we waiting for them, even though they've helped us and given us water and shelter? He's just a baddie all round, isn't he? Actually, sorry, just for accuracy's sake, I should say that they become friends before the snake encounter.
Okay.
They become friends by offering their axe.
Oh yeah,
and they like their axes, and they're like, oh, okay. And then they can see that they're not going to harm them. Then they kill the snake later on, before we get into Olaf's treachery, trying to get the crew. I think the idea is that Vikings hold on to power by force, don't they? By a delicate balance of respect and fear from their crew. And Olaf is always pushing that boundary. He's probably his biggest challenger, therefore he's his number 2. Yeah. Is to keep him close. And Olaf starts...
He's Starscream to Eric's Megatron.
He is definitely Starscream.
I think we're going to have to rush forward a little bit in this, because generally speaking, not much happens except learning about types of crops they've got, which does not include maize.
No.
But what happens is, Eric explains the Viking way of farming, which includes crop rotation, which is still in use today. And he also explains how to use certain seeds to grow maize. He explains them how to make bread, which they do very quickly and very effectively.
They find the seeds for the maize in rattles that are taken from... So they get attacked again by the other tribe. They scare him off using the time ship, which he goes and gets Dave to bring a time ship over, which isn't fixed but is just about able to lurch its way over and scare them.
He's more or less bent the rotors into shape.
Yeah, so that there's like a big spectacle which scares off the attacking tribe, and the tribe attack with rattles for part of their battle cry. And when they break open the rattles, what's inside them are just seeds knocking around. And Eric's like, this is
Maze.
Mrs. Maze, and they don't know how to use it, so he shows
it's
them.
Amazing, he says.
Yes, he does.
It's basically, yeah. So the time ship, unrepaired, comes to the rescue of the second attack.
Yeah.
They're all friends, and because they've saved them, the Mayans have a lovely party, which does involve the sacrifice of the girl that's made friends with Neil.
She's going to be thrown into a pit, isn't she?
Yeah.
Into a sacred pool.
Neil is not having any of it.
No.
And there's a bit of jeopardy as he attempts with a lighter to set fire to something. So they sort of say, don't throw her in there. If the gods wanted her sacrificed... Well, if the gods don't want her sacrificed, they'll set that bridge on fire.
Yeah, if you throw some vegetables in, and the gods will be, if they're happy, they'll give you a sign.
And so he's trying to work this lighter. Click, 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 click.
But it's down to its down to the bottom of the wick.
He's having a little finger the wick out of its little thingy, but he gets it going.
Yeah.
He saves the girl.
Yeah.
Then essentially it's time to go home because
what happened to Olaf? Oh no, Olaf.
Oh, Olaf gets killed.
Olaf manages.
Treacherous little
he does a bit of he manages a bit of a mutiny. It looks like he's getting away with it, but he gets a bit cocky and gives Neil the opportunity to free Eric. Yeah. And Eric kills Olaf, and then he drowns him.
There's quite a good fight scene, isn't there?
Yeah, and then uses that to get the rest of his crew back in line, and they wait out the season. Yeah. Till the crops are ready. They repair the time ship.
Yeah, that's handy.
But he can't. Dave does nothing.
He just sits.
He sits around, and you never see him for ages until his one job as an engineer is he's like, I can't fix this coil because they don't have conducting metal. It needs to be copper, and we don't have copper here, and there's not enough copper in the ship. He says, if only there's some kind of conducting metal,
like all this gold.
Yeah,
all
and Neil,
around.
the unqualified 15-year-old, who's like gold.
Yeah. And then the Mayan jeweler makes him a coil.
Yeah, creates him a coil
that makes the time ship fly.
And so they switch on the temporium. Crystal's fine anyway. That's not been broken.
And then zip, 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 and they're back where they came from.
Pretty much.
Yeah. No one really questions too much about the two missing members of crew.
No one asks, do they? No, they're just all very happy to see them.
But Neil's quite upset because he feels that the mission has been a failure because they couldn't find anyone who knew anything about the Feathered Serpent. The famous Kukulkan.
The famous Kukulkan who brought the people crops and new ways of eating and farming.
And was a giant
blonde-haired kind of man who was possibly had something to do with a serpent.
Yeah, and of course it's Eric, isn't it? That's the end of the day. It was in front of him all along.
And also bolstered in no small part by the appearance of a time ship at one point when Eric was fighting, his ship in the sky, and
combine that with him killing the old snake.
Yeah, and I think that they're trying to say that probably that he is Kukulkan.
Yeah, so we've whizzed through the end of that, but then we really,
yeah, you could.
It's taken us probably about as long to do this episode as it would take anyone to read this book.
Yeah,
well, that's no bad thing, really.
It's not bad. It wasn't a bad read. It was okay. It's just the problem was the being able to understand Swedish, being able to quickly adopt ancient Mayan. Being the fact that they even landed there at that time.
That no one just killed them on sight.
Yeah, the fact that... all that stuff. There's not much else really. Anything after that is kind of... just kind of like ripping along as a bit of a yarn, isn't it, after that? Nothing else is too...
It is a ripping yarn, definitely. Boys' own stuff.
Yeah.
But the time mechanism stuff in this isn't quite as annoying as in Danger Dinosaurs.
No, he doesn't play with time in the sense that it doesn't... I wondered with his dad breaking his leg and stuff. I was wondering if there was going to be a bit of circularity involved, where for some reason he had to be him who went back, and they had to go and sabotage his dad. Because it just never made sense that his dad was just climbing out of the thing, and where there should have been a ladder, some engineer had moved it.
You're thinking too quantum leap.
Well, I was because of Danger Dinosaurs though, because Danger Dinosaurs did the whole.
Ziggy says there's an 86% chance that you have to push your dad off a ladder.
Well, it's just strange for anyone who's to just blindly step onto a ladder that's not there and then just fall over and break your leg. But no, none of that. When they get back, it's just quite straightforward. They get back. The time thing was just like early Doctor Who, just to put them in the story,
just to put them in a historical place,
and then
let something play out.
Give them a reason to leave it again.
Leave it.
leave it at. Yeah.
Right, well, I think we need to come up with a rating for this story. We need a unit as well. My suggestion would be simply maize seeds. How many maize seeds out of 100 would you rate this story?
I'm quite glad they killed the two scientists, so that gives it some plus points, because then it wasn't just, this is called a aqueduct, blah, 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 and lots of info dumping for the sake. Yeah. It's a hard one, really. It's just very hard to compare it to anything in my head that...
You just have to treat it in and of itself.
Yeah. The number that's coming to my mind is a kind of 67 maize seeds.
67? That's quite a high rating, I think.
Yeah, it's not bad for what it is. I just don't know really what
stick with that, Gary. That's fine. If the number coming in your head is 67...
Yeah, but then I'm wondering if that's coming to my head because that's like a common number to pop into someone's head.
Well, you'll drive yourself mad if you start thinking like that.
Yeah, 67.
Well, I can tell you my response is a 50 maize seeds, which I think reflects that it is just a bit of hokum, a bit of boy's own adventure stuff. It's alright. I prefer the more sci-fi, future-y, spacey things.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd have enjoyed that when I was a 15-year-old, but then I'm not a 15-year-old. I probably wouldn't have read that at 15. I think you'd probably... What do you reckon it's aimed for? About 12 years old? I reckon it's aimed for like being 12-year-old, but like, so you're sort of thinking, when I'm a little bit older, I might be allowed to go on an adventure type thing.
There's a bit where he says Neil's sitting there thinking there's probably some kid dreaming of a Norseman on an adventure in a jungle in the future. And I think that's what he's trying to say, is that I think it's aimed at the Neils of the world. It's aimed at the kid.
I think it's probably anything from age 8 to sort of 17, isn't it?
Yeah, it's aimed at the kid who comes home from playing baseball with his friends in the street and gets told, you're going on to travel through time and have an adventure tomorrow.
Yeah.
Don't like that, imagining that rather than...
Wowie zowie.
Yeah.
That's great, Pops.
Gee whiz. So I think that's the audience.
Yeah,
it certainly doesn't resonate really as a... For that audience, I think I would stick with my 67.
Well,
for a general adult, then there's some YA that crosses over. This does not cross over as far as...
No, it's a very... obviously early entry in the author's canon. It's clearly a knocked out quickly work of someone who's used to writing perhaps a couple of thousand words. Yeah. And then suddenly he's like, well, here we go. And
it's basically a way of carrying information about the Mayans to young readership.
Yeah.
It's to carry a bit of history. So it is a vehicle for that. I wouldn't be surprised if he was told you need X number of facts per chapter or something.
Quite possibly.
And that doesn't make for great reading, but it doesn't mean it's not a bad way to learn. I mean, I don't know any much. I know more now.
Yeah,
than I knew before I started.
Although interestingly, just before I was born, about the time I was born, and it's never been repeated, I don't think, there was a programme in the UK on ITV, the third channel, that was called Feathered Serpent, starring the second Doctor Who, Patrick Troughton, as the priest of a tribe. And it's all about the feathered serpent and the myth and the legend surrounding it. And apparently it's quite scary, and one of the reasons they don't repeat it is because it's a kids' programme, but it involves quite a lot of disemboweling.
Oh.
So it was. I don't think they pulled any punches.
Cool. Yeah.
Lovely.
That sounds good.
So in summary, you've given it 67 maize seeds.
Yeah.
I've given it 50 maize seeds.
Yeah.
That's enough for quite a good harvest. Which gives us a grand Kenneth total of, using the rounding down system, 58 maize seeds. Fair enough.
I think that's... Yeah.
There we go. So we've dealt with the Winston Science Fiction stories of Evan Hunter.
So are there other...
Space, dinosaurs and Mayans. And that's more or less it for his kids' output.
But what about... Did he ever do any more long-form science fiction of any...
He did, yeah. We did some adult science fiction books.
Okay.
1 or 2 of them. And maybe we could get round to them at some point. But we've dealt with it. There we go. We can do that noise. That's us doing the hands together.
Going up with some more Cava. And...
Yep. So we can go and carry on our Christmas with our family now, can't we? Mm-hmm. This will be out in the new year, so anything you'd like to promote, Gary, while you're here?
Only my existing output, nothing new. All my books are available on Amazon.co.uk, and they are currently all on KDP Select, which means if you're an Amazon Prime person, you might be able to read them for free, or an Amazon Unlimited or something like that. If not, they're not very much on ebook, or you can get them on copy. But they're called Transported, The Great Connection, and The Dimension Scales, or you can read all sorts of things from my old kind of blogs and things on garryabbott.co.uk. But other than that, not really, no.
Oh, fair enough then. In that case, why don't you say goodbye to the nice ladies and gentlemen and everybody, and we'll finish up.
Goodbye, everybody.
Fare thee well.